Hello and welcome. I'm excited to introduce Stephen, an award-winning entrepreneur with accolades such as Great British Entrepreneur of the Year, Most Influential Agency Figure and Forbes 30 Under 30. Having just announced his exit as the CEO of Social Chain, we are very proud to have Stephen with us today at Webgains Transform to share his experience as a 27-year-old former CEO of one of the largest publicly listed social marketing agencies and media publishers in the UK today.
Hi, so I'm Richard here, the CEO of Webgains. We are continuing the Webgains 2020 Transform seminar series with a number of really interesting conversations. And today, rather this evening, as in the UK, but I guess it's morning for you, Stephen, we've got Stephen Bartlett, who is pretty well known. He is the founder of Social Chain, which has been a phenomenon over the last few years in building brands for a number of different verticals and interest groups, and has, I think I saw, 1 million Instagram followers, 100,000 Twitter followers, and is pretty much a very famous guy. And we're really pleased to have you, Stephen, with us. It's fantastic to speak to you. I'm looking in the background with massive envy. You're clearly in a place a bit warmer than Bristol. So yeah, welcome to the session. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a real honor, and I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, great stuff. So I mean, I suppose you're not in Manchester and you're not in New York. You're not even in Social Chain anymore. So, you know, give us a bit of a chronology of the last I suppose the last few months, and, you know, are you where you are and what's going on?
Yeah, so the last few months have been pretty tumultuous and crazy. Probably the biggest sort of roller coaster I've been on in my professional career. About 3 months ago, I let the board of directors at Social Chain know that I'd be stepping down and that I'd be resigning in August and transitioning out of the business over the coming months up until December. And I've spent really the last couple of weeks out here in Costa Rica finishing up my book and having a bit of sort of mental clarity and really thinking a lot about my future and what I want to do next. So it's one of those sort of key pivotal moments in my journey, in my career, after what has been almost 10 years, but really almost 7 years at Social Chain.
Yeah. So super interesting. I mean, we'll pick up on that in a minute, but I guess you are at the moment, what you're doing, I guess, is picking up on the book that you're trying to write. I think you told me before it's called Happy Sexy Millionaire, and you know, you're still a young guy, so there's a long way ahead. Yeah. What's the thinking behind where you are now?
So, you know, when I announced my resignation, there was hundreds and thousands of comments across LinkedIn and my Instagram and my DMs and emails of people that were understandably shocked. The most popular sentiment was either asking what I'm doing next or why I've left. And then there was this sort of sub-sentiment, which was telling me that I'd made a wrong decision in so many words. And I understand why people find it surprising that the founder and the CEO of a company that is doing incredibly well, that has a tremendous sense of momentum, that has just posted record profits and financial performance numbers, would ever want to leave. And there's also this like fourth sentiment, which is people speculating that something must have happened, or that I was fired, or that I did something wrong, and it's just not the truth. And I understand why you would think that if you don't understand how I think, and the way that I make my decisions in life, my quitting decisions, or the way that I try and decide what's best for me, is based on a set of principles and my long-term aspirations. I'm tremendously haunted by the scarcity of time. Even though I'm young, I know that I'm not going to be young forever, and I know how fleeting, you know, these years are. But I'm also haunted by my own sense of potential and what I can do in my life. And so, for me, and this is probably the first time I've ever actually said this publicly, I wanted to take on bigger challenges with my life and things that made me feel more uncomfortable, things that were more difficult, and things that would ultimately therefore be more rewarding in every sense of the word. And that sounds like a crazy thing to say because people thought that I was on top, right, quote unquote. So the idea that you would go back down to the bottom when you're on top is something that I think people struggle with, because comfort is such a compelling thing. And you know, the position that people saw me in is one that I understand how some would envy. But for me, and what matters to me, it was my time, and that's why I made the decision. Maybe I'm crazy, but
yeah,
you know, the
It's
framework.
interesting. I mean, absolutely. And I think you're young, and I think you're probably almost half my age. So it's quite an interesting thing to think about. But in fact, it's my birthday today, so it's one of those days where you do think about your age too. But you know, I've been in a situation with myself. There are definitely people who love the challenge of a starting or the explosion at the beginning of a business. And then, of course, it's like a river. You have a very sort of fast-flowing stream for the first few miles of the river, and then it widens out, and then you get, you know, other things involved, and before you have it, it's a very complex business full of internal meetings, and you don't really have the thrill of the chase anymore. So I completely understand with that. I'm guessing you may have gone through that kind of thing yourself.
Yeah, do you know what? Starting a business really sucks in so many ways. It's so excruciatingly difficult, and it's not something that I particularly envy. However, there is part of starting something and taking on a challenge that makes you feel slightly terrified, which I'm addicted to. And not to say that you can't have that sense of terror and challenge in a big company that, you know, that is a global business that is taking on big challenges. But for me, that's what I was seeking, and that's what I couldn't find for myself in this challenge. And so I'm taking some time out, and whatever I do next will be at the scale and offer me the terror that I'm seeking for myself and my career. And I just wanted to say as well, that making this decision is also something that people assume would be terrifying or full of anxiety and worry. But because I have a pretty solid framework as to how I make this kind of decision, that is admittedly quite subconscious, and that framework has guided me through getting expelled from school because I just decided to stop going when I was 16, dropping out of university after one lecture, leaving my first startup out of the blue again, and now leaving Social Chain. Every single time that framework has put me in a better place. It's led me to be more happy, more fulfilled, more successful, and to find, in the relationship context, which I talk about in my book as well, even better love. And so it's one that I believe in, and one that I don't need to worry about in terms of my emotions. So yeah.
And what comes across with you is a kind of supreme inner confidence. You're pretty settled with who you are. I mean, we all have imposter syndrome in our lives, but at the same time, there's a difference between people who are too frightened to jump out of where they are, and other people that are actually the other way around. They're too frightened to stay where they are, and they just don't want to commit, and they want to be turning the wheel all the time. So, you know, you're obviously on the spectrum between one end of that and the other, which I would say you are addicted to that. You're addicted to the adrenaline that's driven by the fear of failure as opposed to the fear of failure, and other people are driven by the horror of the fear of failure, and therefore they don't move. It's really interesting. I mean, it's one of the reasons we're doing these seminars, is really to understand and distill and synthesize what makes people like you and maybe me or some other people who have seen a pretty fast-moving career, you know, how we can use those sort of things to help other people get through their toughest parts of their life, or even accelerate the best parts of their lives.
You know, I've been writing a lot about this. In fact, the chapter that I was writing this morning today, sat over there in the jungle, was about this idea of your self-concept. And in business, your self-concept and your self-image and who you think you are and the stories you've told yourself about who you are manifest in every decision you make or don't make. I've seen this in my company. We've got 700 people. I can tell you who has imposter syndrome. I can tell you who, when I turn around and say, we're going to take on this big challenge or this big innovation, stop what you're doing, come with me, we're going to build something in 2 weeks, who was going to go, amazing, let's do it, and who was going to go, no, wait, stop. I need to have meetings, I need to have a plan. And that all comes from their self-concept, which is this deep-rooted, hardwired thing, which we think we can overcome with a motivational quote on Instagram or a motivational seminar or some course. But it's so deeply rooted and hardwired in us that surface-level solutions to deep-rooted problems are just never going to work. They're just wishful thinking. And so the chapter I was writing today was about how you overcome that deep-rooted hardwiring, and also the consequences, the adverse consequences if you don't. You know, there's people in my company who were fired from my company because ultimately of something that happened when they were 4 years old. And there's one particular example I write about where one of one person we hired to be at the very top of our company couldn't shake a set of beliefs about himself, which had made him insecure, which made him a micromanaging, slightly narcissistic leader, despite what we tried, despite coaching, despite words and everything else. And when you said a second ago that my defining quality is self-belief. It's the truest thing I've ever heard. But it's what I say about myself. I say that if there's one thing that makes me different, it isn't, you know, my parents are broke. My mum still can't read or write. I was born in Africa. We've never had any money. My family is still basically bankrupt. My parents, anyway. I didn't come from anything. My grades were terrible. I didn't go to university, but I've just always, for whatever reason, a reason that I can't take credit for, had this sense that I could do whatever I set my mind to. And what that does is, even if at that moment it's not true, it pushes you through all of these walls of learning and experience and building that are required to actually be able to do that thing. And this is why my favorite quote is, those who think they can and those who think they can't are both usually right. And so I'm going to take you back to the point about what you believe about yourself. You know, the example that I give in my book is, I say, if I got your mother right now and I held a gun to her head and I said, I'm going to pull the trigger if you don't immediately start believing that I'm Jesus Christ of Nazareth, all you could do is lie to me. Even if everything was on the line, you couldn't actually believe that I was Jesus Christ of Nazareth, because your belief system, you know, about me and also about yourself is based on subjective evidence that you have and how you've interpreted that evidence. If I suddenly started levitating and turning water into wine, maybe you would, but you've got to think about the same with yourself. I can't just tell you what to believe, and you can't tell you what to believe. And so the examples in my business where someone has managed to go on that journey and actually change the labels that they've given themselves have nearly always been because they've put themselves in a position to get and to create new evidence about themselves which contradicts their existing limiting beliefs. And so my advice to everybody is, like, if you don't think you're a public speaker or you're not that type of person, the only way for you to change that opinion of yourself is to go get the evidence that you can and that you are. I was 14 when I first did my public talk, and I'm shaking with fear and nerves, so much so that I didn't actually read what I was meant to read. Like I'm like this, right? Again, going back
We've all
to,
been there.
I'm like, and that moment can send your confidence down to the point where you'll never try that again. Or you can be the type of person that then tries it one more time and then goes on the growth journey. And then, you know, you fast forward 10 years, I'm on stage with Obama in Brazil, there's 15,000 people in front of me. And it's because of, you know, oh my God, there's a raccoon or some kind of bear there. It's caught my eye, there's literally like a bear 3 meters away from me, but fortunately there's
it's obviously very interesting what you have to say.
But that's it, and that's the difference. And so my job as a CEO has always been to how can I give my team the evidence that they're wrong about that, you know, limiting belief, or how can we show them that they are.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I think as you grow a business, you go from I know you're distracted. As you go through the growth stages of a business, you know, you have these generalist guys or girls that can do everything, and then as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you realize that you need specialists. And the transition from generalist, where you are literally capable of everything, to specialist is usually something you can't do as a human, and therefore what you're doing is you're transposing your team, and you're actually rotating the entirety of your team. And that's a very, very traumatic thing to have to go through. And also the people who are kind of not able to do the specialist stuff are really pissed off. And then the people who are specialists saying, actually, I can do everything, and they can't, are also really pissed off. And that's a big transitional change. So have you seen that in your career? Because that's one of the things I think actually early on in careers, people should try and realize that they are one or the other. Most entrepreneurs are pretty good generalists and very, very bad specialists because they just can't do one thing all the time.
You know, I completely agree. I don't think I can add anything to what you've said, but yeah, especially going from being a small startup of, you know, 6 people in Manchester to being 700 people. A lot of the people at the start didn't make it because we hired people that could wear multiple hats, but couldn't do any particular job better than, you know, someone 3 years later that we found that's been doing that job in a big company for 10 years could. Yeah. And a lot of it was something we always said, myself and my business partner John, was only a few of the originals were able to make it, and it was typically those that started in semi-specialist roles. So if there was one guy that was incredibly good at building social media audiences to millions of followers and we hired him at the start, he'd make it. But someone that we put in the accounts department or sales department, which is a fairly broad term when there's, you know, you've got 6 people, those people didn't typically make it, and they definitely didn't progress.
And you can see this in larger organizations, and one of the problems they have in innovating is that they don't have any innovators because they have managers, or they have, you know, the leaders, but they're kind of almost in an army basis. They've got troops and platoons and they're running teams of people, but they're not actually able to innovate because you have to have that serendipity in process. And and by their very nature, specialists can't do that. So it's a super interesting thing. So all I'm trying to say is that there's definitely a kind of personality trait or set of behaviours that identify a fire starter or a rainmaker that you clearly have, and I can identify in other people. But how can anyone sort of identify themselves as that? If somebody's, because of course there's lots of this narrative at the moment say, hey, drop out of life, go and start a business. You know, you've got the Vaynerchuks and all the other guys out there saying, how hard can it be? You know, start a business and free yourself. And actually, you and I both well know, you've got 3 years of absolute shit pain. And then after that, if you're lucky and you've matched the right zeitgeist, then you've got a chance. The rest of the time, it's about 99% shot that it's going to be a hard ride. You know, what kind of advice can you give to people about that? The realities of the dream.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate consequence of the world we live in, especially the social media world we live in, where you know, external factors can quite easily convince you of what you think you want, and ultimately that's not something that is in conducive with your internal intrinsic motivations and desires. So, you know, I go on Instagram and it tells me that it implicitly tells me that I want to be a millionaire that has all of these, you know, fans and followers, and that has all of these wonderful things. And then I spend my life trying to realize that goal, only to realize when I get there that all of that was a mirage and it didn't exist. And this is really what the book is about. That's why it's called Happy, Sexy Millionaire, because I wrote in my diary that I wanted a Range Rover, a girlfriend, a six-pack, and £1 million. When I was like, where did that come from? Like, do you know what I mean? It came from being a broke kid that could never get girls in school, that whose parents never had anything nice. We never had a good car. Our car had dents in it and would backfire and all these kinds of things. I had to get my parents to drop us as far from the school as I could. Our home was smashed to pieces with 6-foot grass. So I grew up with that insecurity and wanting to be that thing, but there was nothing in it for me. So going back to your question, there's a couple of things that you can do. I mean, the hard route is life will tell you, but often that's too late. You'll get to, you know, the middle of your life, having done something that having lived out someone else's life, and you'll get there and realize that you're totally unfulfilled. It's you know, I was reading about this study from a guy called Professor Tim Kessler, which shows that if you live your life intrinsically motivated, doing the things that you enjoy for the act in and of itself, playing piano because you like the piano, or not playing piano because you're trying to get laid or trying to get external validation from the people in the audience, then you'll live a much more happy, fulfilled life, but also a much more successful one. And understanding what your intrinsic motivations are is difficult, as I said, because of the social media world we live in. For me, the thing that's helped me the most, and a thing that I think everybody should do, is to journal and to diary, because there's very few opportunities you get to look at your own behavior, your own decisions, and how you're feeling from a truly like bird's eye view. Therapy's great for that because you get that real sort of objective perspective. But for me, journaling, writing, and my podcast are the three things that have had the biggest impact on me getting closer to understanding who I really am, why I really behave the way I behave, and some of those childhood stories I've told myself, which hold me back still to this day. So it's genuine. I'm not just saying this. It's like, it's genuinely the single most valuable habit that I have is doing my podcast, writing, and anything that makes me go on that introspective journey to understand myself. And it's because those things are so deep and subconscious. If you don't do that and you're just going with the flow, the chances are the flow is going to take you to a place, is a wave that's going to take you to a place that you don't actually want to be. And
that's super interesting. If you look now where we are, sorry to cut into you, but if you look now, if you think of somebody who's gone to school and they've done well in their A levels, you know, the UK employment educational system where they're on the conveyor belt, and you know, work hard at school, you get your A levels, work hard at A levels, you get your university, work hard at university, or you know, at least get through it, you get a degree, you get your early job, your middle job, manager job, you know, and as long as everything flows like you were saying, then that's fine and it can work. Clearly now with COVID and the pandemic and lockdowns and redundancies, that flow is interrupted, and so there's a lot of people now thinking, oh my God, you know, this isn't how I thought it was going to be. What the hell am I going to do? So I suppose it's a time for introspection and reflection, thinking about what's important to you and trying to stay cool, because otherwise it's easy to panic and then things are going to be tough.
You've got to ask yourself, that flow you've described there, is that a unconscious flow? Are you just going to school because they said you should, going to do that job because taking that degree because your mum said so, taking that job because it was the job that you got offered. If your life is this unconscious flow where you're really just a passenger in other people's ideas and other people's estimation of how your life is meant to be lived, I promise you, the destination is going to be unfulfilling. And that's why that flow has to be much more conscious. That's what my diary and my podcasting and the introspection allows me to do. It's like, and this is ultimately why I ended up resigning from Social Chain, because I was conscious enough of where I was going and how I was feeling and where I want to go to say with total confidence and without anxiety that, nope, this is me done here. I'm going to go that way now, you know? And that's the conscious flow that I've navigated through my life. And as I said, it's made me more fulfilled in everything that I do. I can't think of I said this to my friend the other day, I can't think of a day in the last 10 years where I've been unhappy for more than like a couple of hours. You know what I mean? Like I'm like a very naturally happy person. More fulfilled. It's made me more successful as I've pivoted through life, getting closer to what I'm good at and what I love. And then also in my relationships, my romantic relationships, it's meant that I've gotten even closer to what's meant for me. So yeah.
Yes, that's really nice. And of course, you know, energy radiators like you, Stephen, they attract other energy radiators, and that's important. I mean, you've got the concept of the zappers and the radiators and things like that, and you can clearly see how that benefits you. I suppose, you know, most people aren't like you, and probably not even like me in some respects. Obviously, I'm older than that. There's somewhere in the middle, I guess, and I think the point that you're saying is that there's no such thing as a linear career. It's kind of a slalom or a zigzag, and the key point is to really identify when there is that fork in the road and where you do have a real choice and to stay in control. The art of quitting, I think you said it in previously, you know, there is an art to quitting, and it can be a very positive thing as opposed to just something that everybody says, oh, well, you know, you've given up, we're gonna forget about you.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to give myself too much credit here, because my quitting framework per se is something that has always been really subconscious, but I've just started to kind of write it out to make sense of it. And for me, I'll just run you through it quickly. It's at the top, it starts with, are you thinking about quitting something? And then the next question has to be, why are you thinking about quitting? And there's really two branches of that. You're thinking about quitting because it sucks, or you're thinking about quitting something because it's really, really hard. And then, so if you're thinking about quitting because something's hard, you've got to ask yourself, is the challenge worth the potential return? And if you think it is, then don't quit. If you think it isn't, if you think it's really, really hard and it's not actually worth the hardship, quit. Go off the other way. So say you're thinking of quitting because something really sucks, and you can define what sucks means. That's a very subjective thing. So the question becomes, do you believe there's a chance, there's a high probability that you could make it not suck, right? And if the answer is no, then quit. If the answer is yes, then you ask yourself that question again, which is the effort it would take to make it not suck worth it for you? And if it's yes, then don't quit. And if it's no, then quit. And that's really what I went through myself was, this situation isn't great. Do I think I could make it great? I tried and I couldn't. So ultimately I decided that, the effort it would take to make it not suck, or my ability to make it not suck, was impossible. I quit.
It's in your own hands. You're staying in control of yourself. You're ahead of the current, and you can dictate your own direction. I mean, clearly not everybody is in the position to do that at the moment, but I suppose a lot of people do need jerks, and they'll jump to a new job, or they've got pressure of rent, mortgages, families, whatever they may have, and those things will always come into play. It's a little bit different to the likes of people, I suppose, like yourself, where you haven't got too many ties, and but at the same time, you're in your 20s. Why should you? I certainly didn't when I was the same age as you, and in fact I was only a year at university when I was your age. And it's a long career, right? So we're gonna. I said the other day, my cousin who's a genomist, he said that the first 200-year-old person to live is already alive now. These are long lives that everyone's going to live, and the old concept of a 40-year career is kind of becoming redundant. You can take time out. You can take your time. You don't need to get your degree by 21. You don't even need a degree. In fact, most of the most successful people I know didn't even do A-levels, kind of left school very early or as soon as they possibly could. And the other thing that I've realized is that a lot of those guys in their first jobs were working for commission only, learning how to sell and convince and influence people, which clearly is a great skill to have. And presentation, you mentioned at the beginning, the best thing you can ever have is to show your ability and your willing in a face-to-face situation, as opposed to knowing the inside out square root tables or whatever. That's interesting. So You know, lifelong learning for me is very important. It's my first priority. It's one of the reasons we have a Webgains Academy. It's one of the reasons why we don't give anyone promotions in the business unless they've gone through the Academy modules. I don't want to shove learning down people's throats, but it is so important, because I know, and I'm older than them, that if you learn, I mean, I learn languages, I've learned music, it just enriches your life so much. So I suppose a close question for you is, you know, how do you learn? What is your learning style? Are you just jump in, or, you know, do you just sort of graze as life goes on? Or is it a conscious thing or a subconscious thing?
So I spent my life believing that my sort of intellectual progress would come from reading more books and learning more stuff in the typical ways you think, or doing courses. And similar to what I said earlier on, what I came to learn was that until I was able to read myself, I would never really learn a thing. And it was actually a lesson taught to me by one of my employees who read all of the books in the world, listened to every podcast in the world. He'd come in every morning and tell me which book he read. However, he had so many issues in the office with dealing with other people and really applying all of that information he had learned, that he just couldn't ever progress in our business. And so that's why I wrote in my diary, and I've shared it on my Twitter account, that you can read as many books as you like, but until you can read yourself, you'll never learn a thing. So that really, for me, inspired unlearning. And for me, unlearning a bunch of things about myself and beliefs that I had about myself and the world that were holding me back is really the thing that unlocked my ability to not just learn stuff, but then to be able to apply it without ego or, you know, insecurity. But to answer your question more generally, I don't read books I don't really read books, right? So I don't read books from front to back. Probably the biggest source of my learning is, it's going to sound like a crazy thing to say, but my Twitter account. I made the decision, you know, I looked at myself objectively and said, I spend up to 9 hours a day on these timelines. If there's any source of information that's influencing more, it's these timelines. And so I went through, I muted pretty much all of my friends. I started following people on my Twitter account that would teach me things in 280 characters. And because I now spend hours and hours every single day scrolling through Twitter, I'm learning about everything from philosophy to the stock market to Silicon Valley, the startup community, to the VC world and everything, because I've sort of curated my timeline to cut out the nonsense, cut out the extrinsic and superficial, motivations and messaging, and just to teach me stuff. And I think it's something that people don't think about enough, if I'm honest.
Yeah, sure. I suppose for me, I do that now and again. If I want to know something that's happened right now, then that Twitter's a great way of. But then you still have to filter. You still have to work out, actually, is this real or not real? And you're in an echo chamber. You have to realize you're in an echo chamber. You have to try and break out that echo chamber.
Isn't it insane? Think about, you can't name another point in history where you could vicariously observe the thoughts of the world's smartest people as they interact with each other. Imagine if you could peer into Einstein's thoughts, you know, as he thought out loud. And that's really what my Twitter account has become. I follow people from all walks of life and disciplines, but purely that tweet things that will teach me something. And if I follow you, and you don't do that, it's because you're muted. So I genuinely believe 80% of the people that I follow are muted, and I just spend all day learning from these other people that share valuable things. But again, to answer the question a little bit more broadly as well, my inspiration and my learning comes from everywhere. It comes from music and going to the theatre, and even being out here in nature is so inspiring for me. But yeah, I think I just wanted to reject the idea that you get smart from books. I think there's a lot of other ways that are more important in 2020.
Yeah, there's nothing like, I just love roaming around. I just love meeting people, listening to what they've got to say, often face to face, and just finding myself in a strange environment and just adapting to it. There's nothing I like more than going to a new place and getting myself lost on purpose to find my way back. And it's just a great way to learn your way. I mean, it's a bit dangerous sometimes, but I just love that. And then trying to pick up a few words of the language. It's just a challenge, it's always a challenge. And I'm challenged by my learning. And also I've got to try and make sure that I know a little bit more than a few other people, just to make myself valuable, really. But at the same time, you're right. You need to be able to play music because you like to play music, and you like to listen to it because you like to listen to it, and just have that, it's a buzzword, but the mindfulness of enjoyment of just being by yourself sometimes can be pretty powerful, having time to think.
One thing that I've really learned lately as well is, before we had this conversation, and in the lead up to this, when we were chatting, we talked about how we all label ourselves something. So Steve Bartlett is a social media marketing CEO. So you'd think that my learning would center around those two topics, right? And then that kind of puts me in a little bit of a box. But there's this theory about skill stacking, which shows the most valuable people in the world are those that are able to stack unique and complementary skills. So you've got someone like Steve Jobs, who did typography and then did, design, and then was a coder, but then had the skills of an entrepreneur, a charismatic entrepreneur. And in fact, the uniqueness of his stack was what led him to create something which was ultimately unique. So one thing that I've actively tried to do is to, for my lifelong learning and my sources of learning, to be intentionally diverse. And that's what I mean by, like, I learned from music and the theater and production and science and engineering, and then, a poet, and all of that can come together to make me a uniquely valuable and different proposition as a social media marketing CEO. And and I think that's so important, to diversify your learning in order to be even better at the thing you do and even more unique at the thing you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I completely agree with you. I suppose with me, maybe it's a generational thing. For me, Twitter I find as annoying as I find inspiring.
Really?
It's because it's just, sometimes you think someone's opinion, and it's probably because I'm a miserable old man, and you just think, oh my goodness me, I've been through all these things you're talking about, and I know that in reality it's not like that. But I don't say anything because I'm mute on Twitter. I just wouldn't say anything. But it's interesting to see how so many mistakes I made year after year, cycle after cycle, generation after generation, and I suppose that's the value of wisdom you get as you're older. But it's always good, and it's always good to see people like yourself and somebody with real energy, passion, motivation, and self-belief. It's kind of the curiosity plus confidence thing, which is so powerful. If you're always looking, this is why I always say never stop learning, never stop learning. Whatever learning you need to take, you'll only cope with change, because change is constant. Change is never going to stop, and you're only going to cope with it if you continue to change yourself, and that can only come through learning. Right? So this is why it's so important that we talk to people like you on these sessions with seminars, because you could sit in a job for 25 years and 35 years, as some people still do, and good luck to them and happy days, and they've got a nice stable life and they go home and they have a nice time. That isn't for me, and that's not for a lot of other people. And
I was going to say, I'm not actually convinced that is for many people at all. And I know we all know people that are content with very little, seemingly content with very little, but it would appear that all the evidence and the scientific evidence that I've observed shows that we are creatures that are meant to live in forward motion, and that we spend our lives thinking, again, I write about this in the book. I'm not trying to plug my book, by the way, I don't really care if anybody buys it. We're creatures that spend our lives thinking that stability is stability and that chaos is chaos. So we try and reach stability, which is completed goals, financial security, and everything under control. But the science shows, and gold medal depression and all the unhappiness and depression you see in people that have accomplished their goals, shows that once you reach this place we thought was stability, you actually fall into chaos. And so this led me to kind of reframe it and think, okay, so in fact, my stability is chaos, and my chaos is stability. So my life is, and this is again why I quit Social Chain, is because I need the chaos. I need to live forward motion. I need to never be accomplished. I need to always have my goals just out of sight, and I need to set myself so big that I will never achieve them. And I think that journey is the journey of my life, and it's that will be the most fulfilled journey. And I really, really believe that. I've studied it from every angle and tried to refute it, and it just appears to be tremendously true.
Conventional wisdom that's been passed to us by Greek philosophers, really. I mean, this is not a new concept. It's definitely the journey, not the destination, because the destination is the end. And we all do have an end. Even if you're 200, there's going to be another end. So the journey is very important, and the more you can experience it.
The most unnerving, uncomfortable day of my life in recent times was the day that we became a public company, and I realized how much money I had. Mm-hmm. It sounds like such a strange thing to say, but I woke up that day, picked up my phone, called my business partner Dom, who had also just earned tens of millions because of this one thing that happened that day. And Dom was in this like despondent, passive, depressive mood, and so was I. Yeah. And it was because the anticlimax of the completed goal was yeah, it's the anticlimax of
I've heard it
being.
many times. I've heard it many times when people have gone through the same thing, whether they've had stock options mature or they sold business. I remember there's a good friend of mine, and they got, I don't know, 30 million or something, and the first thing they did was the dream holiday that they've always wanted, and they did it, and they got there, and they after about 5 minutes they were like, oh well, I didn't think it was going to be like this, and there's other people here, and you know, and all of a sudden you looked at somebody. I think there's a Russian billionaire. He said there's always a bigger billionaire, there's always a bigger boat, there's always a bigger house. And it's all you're doing is going over the hill and saying, "Oh shit, there's a load more hills."
Yeah,
God, whatever they may be. So it's interesting because a lot of people are fighting. A lot of your first goals were, "I want to be a millionaire at 25," and then you reach that and you think, "Oh, right. Well, I've
yeah,
got another few years to go now. What am I going to do?" So people can either do, I suppose, altruism, and they go into philanthropy and all those kind of good things, which may be what you or whoever may do, or they go again and they start a new thing, or do both. And that's a perfectly valid way of doing things.
and I think they call that hedonistic adaptation, don't they? When you kind of
Yeah,
adapt to your new circumstances and you don't get the same pleasure from it. So for me, you're right. For me, my solution to that was to set myself even bigger goals, and also the realization that monetary goals were just never ever going to be the thing anymore. And
yeah,
that's why the book is called Happy Sexy Millionaire, because I was so wrong to think that, you know, my happiness would scale with my bank account. You know,
yeah.
so my goals now are about challenges and about moonshots and about what I can do to change things, but also they're so terrifying that I hope I don't really ever accomplish them. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I think, Stephen, that's an absolutely fantastic time to draw it to a close. I mean, what a great half an hour or so of conversation. I mean, it's very inspiring. And, you know, not everyone's going to live a life like yours so young. However, there are so many things that you can distill from what you've seen in your short career so far that are resonating with millions, literally millions of people. So, you know, fantastic success with that. And I hope we stay in touch with you. We'd love you to be involved in some way or another with Webgains as we go forward. But it's been brilliant talking to you, Stephen. Thank you so much. Enjoy the animals on your terrace and the monkeys and the power cuts and everything. Um, and have a great time. Thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Take it easy.